And welcome back to the channel. So in today's tutorial we're going to learn CSS Flexbox, and we'll be doing so by building this photo gallery here. And by building this, we'll be learning all about CSS Flexbox. Now CSS Flexbox is used to create layouts in CSS, right? So let's get started with the first lesson. All right, so we'll begin by adding the standard HTML boilerplate. So the way we do that is to declare our doc type. Now this is what is going to tell the browser the type of document that we are asking it to read. And in this case, the type of document is an HTML. Okay, so next up, let's add an HTML element like so. And then for the HTML element, you're going to give it an attribute of lang, which will be the language, and we'll set it to en, which stands for English. And then inside our HTML element, we want to add a head element and then a body element as well. Okay, so for the head, yeah, I think that should be it for this step. Okay, next up, inside our head element, we want to add two meta elements. Now, the meta element is a self-closing tag, so there's no need for us to add a closing element. So the first meta element will have a name attribute set to viewport, and then it will also have a content attribute. The value of the content attribute will be this right here, so I'll just copy it and then I'm going to paste it here. The second meta element, we want to give it a char set attribute with a value of UTF-8. Okay, so let's move on. Now what we want to do is we want to add, still inside the head element, we want to add a title element. And the text we want to give the title element is going to be photo gallery. And then we also want to give it a link. So what we want to do is we have our styles.css file here, and want to link our styles.css file to our HTML file. So the way we do that is to use the link element, give it a rel property with the attribute with a value set to style sheet, and then we give it an href with a value set to styles.css. Okay, now we can test if we've done it properly by saying background, let's do body background green. Okay, so it means our styles.css has been correctly linked to our HTML. Okay, so next up, we want to add a header element within the body element, and then what we also want to do is that we want to assign this header element a class. So the value of the class is going to be header. Now inside this header element, like so, we want to add an h1 for our title. So our title is going to be CSS Flexbox Photo Gallery. So as a reminder, this is what we are building. Okay, so this is the h1 that we just added. Okay, let's continue. All right, now below the header element we just added in the previous step, we want to create a new div. Okay, and then we want to assign it a class. The value of the class is going to be gallery. All right, the div is going to act as a container for the gallery images that will be added. So inside the div with the class gallery, we want to create 9 image elements. Okay, so I'll just create one, and I'm going to use the shortcut Option Shift. If you're on Windows, you use Alt Shift and then press down. Okay, so once I press down, it just creates the same element. Okay, so I think I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yeah. Okay, so next up for step 6, we want to give each image element a source attribute. So the way we're going to do that is to give the first one the source attribute, and then the rest will be the same except the number that will change, right? So the second one will have a number of 2, the third one a number of 3, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to use another shortcut here. I'm just going to click here and click and hold Alt and click on the rest. Either Alt on Windows or Option on Mac. Once I do that, I can type at different places at the same time. So I'll just write source, and then I'll just copy this, then I'll paste it. So the first one will have a value of 1. The second one will be 2. Three, so 4, 5. We're almost done. 6, 7, 8, and then finally the last one will be 9. Okay, so now we have these 9 images that we are going to be working with. Okay, so next up, we want to get into the styling. So the first thing we're going to do with the styling is to use the star selector. And what does is that it selects all the elements on our page. So we want to use the star selector, and we're going to set box sizing to border box. Okay, now your images are too big, so we want to create a .gallery image selector. So .gallery will select our div with the class of gallery, and then inside that div with the class of gallery, we want to select all the images. Okay, so going back to our HTML, you can see that we have this div here with a class of gallery, and inside it we have all these images. So that's what we are selecting. All right, so what we want to do is to give them all a width of 100%. Okay, and then we also want to give them max width of 350 pixels. Then we also want to give it a height of 300 pixels. All right. Next up, we want to remove the margin from the body element. So the way we do that is to just select the body element like so, and then give it a margin of 0. And then for the font family, we want to set it to sans serif, and we also want to set a background color of what we have right here. So I'll just copy it and then we'll paste it like so. Okay, so we want to align the header text in the center. So this is the header text. We want to align it in the center. So the way we do that is just say dot header. We'll say text align center. Okay, then we also want to change it to uppercase, because as you can see here, for the final page the heading is an uppercase. So the way we do that is to use the property called text transform, and with this text transform property we can have a value of uppercase which will transform the text from lowercase to uppercase. Then let's give it a padding of 32 pixels on all sides. We'll set the background to this color here. Okay, and as you can see now, because of the background we cannot see the text, but the text is still there. So we want to change the color to white. That way we can see the text. All right, finally we want to add a border button, and that will be for this yellowish line you see here. So we'll say border button, and first will be the size, which is 4 pixels. The style is going to be solid, and the color is going to be this color we have here, FDB 347. Okay. All right, now let's get into the Flexbox proper. So Flexbox is a one-dimensional CSS layout, and it can be used to control the way items are spaced out and the way they are aligned within a container. So basically it's just used for creating layouts. Okay, so to use it, the first thing you have to do is to give an element a display property of flex. And what does that is that it's going to turn that element into a flex container, and then any direct children of that element will become what we call a flex item. So for us, we want to select our div with the gallery class. So we want to change or set that div into a flex container. So we say display flex. Okay, and once we do that, you see all the images are lined up horizontally instead of vertically like before, and there's a reason for that, which we'll learn about in the next step. Okay, so like I said, Flexbox has a main and cross axis, and the main axis is defined by the flex direction property. This property has 4 possible values, so row reverse, column, and column reverse. So the axis and direction will be different depending on the text direction. The values shown are for a left to right text direction. Okay, so try the different values to see how they affect the layout. So the default value is the row value, right? So currently, as you can see, the images are arranged from left to right. Now, if we change the value or let me just say flex direction. Let's give it a value of row. Nothing changes because row is the default value, so that's from left to right. But if we change it from row to row reverse, then instead of left to right, it is from right to left, as you can see. And then when we change it from row reverse to column, that becomes from top to down. And then column reverse is from bottom, or the first image will be below and then the last image will be at the top. All right. So when you are done, you can play around with it. And when you are done, set an explicit flex direction value of row. So let's set it back to row and move on to the next one. All right, so now let's look at something called flex wrap. So the flex wrap property determines how the flex items behave when the container is too small. So in this one, our images are in the gallery container. So for example, if the gallery container is too small, like this, what do we want to happen? For now, nothing happens because the default value is no wrap. And when it is no wrap, all the images will be lined up as we can see currently. But if we set it to wrap, so we say flex wrap and set the value to wrap, see what happens. Right, you see that the images move to the next line. They show that the value of the flex wrap is wrap instead of no wrap. Okay, so now let's look at something called justify content property. So this property is going to determine how the items inside the flex container are positioned. So we want to set our gallery, give it a justify content property with a value of center. Now you see our images are justified in the center. All right. We also next up want to look at align items. So the align items property positions the flex content along the cross axis. In this case, with your flex direction set to row, your cross axis will be vertical. Okay, so we want to set the images, give it an align items property with the value of center as well. Next up, let's give the gallery selector a padding property of 20 pixels and then 10 pixels. So we say padding. The first value will be 20 pixels and the second value is going to be 10 pixels. What this means is that the first value is going to be applied to the top and bottom, and the second value is going to be applied to the left and right. We also want to set a max width with a value of 1400 pixels, margin with a value of 0, and auto. This also means that the first value, which is 0, will be applied to margin top and then margin bottom. And then the second value, which in this case is auto, will be applied to margin left and margin right. So first value for top and bottom, second value for left and right. Okay, so notice that some of the images have become distorted. So for example, see this one and this one as well as this one. Now the reason is because the images have different aspect ratio, but then we have given them all the same height and width. So what is happening is that the images are being stretched so that they will meet the height and width standard that we've given them. And that's not what we want our images to look like. So the way we can fix it is to use what we call the object fit property. The value we are going to be giving it is cover. Now what this does is that it uses the original aspect ratio, which is the height and width of the images, but then crops out any excess that we'll be having. Okay. Well, we also need some spaces between the images. As you can see in the final images, we have some spaces between them. So the way we do that is to use a property called gap. So the gap property sets gaps or gutters between the rows and columns. Okay, so the property and its row gap or column gap sub-properties provide this functionality for flex, grid, and other multi-column layout. So the way we can apply this property to the container element is to give it a gap property, and then we give it a value. So let's say 16 pixels in this case. Okay, as you can see now, we have gaps between our images. Okay, so next up, we want to smooth out the images a bit by giving them a border radius. So when you look at the final page, you see that there's this rounded curve edges that's given to it. So the way we can achieve that is to use what we call border radius and give it a value of 10 pixels. Okay. Yeah, so we're almost done. Now let's look at something called the after pseudo element. Now this pseudo element creates an element that is the child or the last child of the selected element. So for example, we have our gallery element, and as you can see, our gallery element has this last element here, the last image here, which is the last child of the gallery element. So when we use the after pseudo element on the gallery container, what happens is we can create a new child element for that gallery container. So for example, let's say dot gallery and say after. Okay, we give it a property of content and then give it an empty string, but let's give it something. Let's say hello. So as you can see, we have this hello which appears on the page. So let's give it a height so that it will be the same as this. So give it a width of 350 pixels. Okay, so now we have this hello element here, which is also 350 pixels. So if I take it away, see that this guy here is centered. But as you can see, when we look at the final image, we want it to be to the left and not centered as we see at the moment. So I'll just bring it back and then take this hello away. So just give it an empty string. All right, so the final thing we want to do is just add an alt to all of these images. So I'll just click here and then hold option. You can hold alt if you're on Windows and just click through all of these places. Okay, I'll say alt and then let's name them. So the first one, let's just call it Sleepy Cat. Let's call the second one, let's just say Lazy Cat. Let's call this Wild Cat. Let's call this Snoring Cat. Let's call this one White Cat. Let's call these twins Twin Cats. Let's give this one Adorable Cat. Let's call this let's just say Orange Cat. Let's call this guy here Lonely Cat. Okay, so that will be it for this video on Flexbox. So yeah, that's it. So we are done with this one on Flexbox, and then we can look, you can check out the other ones on the CSS Box Model or this project or any of the other previous ones that I have already done. All right, so that's it for now. See you in the next one.